Hello. I'm Kate Bramham. I'm a kidney doctor from King's College London. Thank you so much for inviting me. I've had excellent experiences working with SynLab, which I'm keen to share with you today in the context of APOL1 kidney disease. These are my disclosures. My journey and my interest in APOL1 kidney disease started over 10 years ago when I was appointed as a consultant at King's College Hospital. I was overwhelmed by the number of patients who were of African ancestry. The majority of the patients on our unit, and particularly the unit that I look after, are of African descent, mainly from West Africa and from the Caribbean. And in our local population, we provide care for the highest proportion of people of African ancestry in the UK. This is in part because of the local population, but also because we've recently increasingly recognised that people of African ancestry are at 3-fold to 5-fold now increased chance of developing kidney disease. And we all know that having kidney failure has a life expectancy that's worse than most cancers. So this is a catastrophe. The tragedy as well is that the people that are of African ancestry that need to start dialysis are approximately 10 years younger than white patients when they start dialysis. And this adds a huge burden on the individual, their earning capacity, and also their families. These are data from the UK that again demonstrates that people of African descent and Caribbean descent are increasingly likely, compared to even other ethnic minorities who are historically recognised to have higher risk factors for kidney disease. So this is a real problem. And this is also seen in the United States, which I think perhaps is also compounded by access to healthcare, opportunities to prevent onset of kidney failure, and treatment of diabetes and hypertension, which are the biggest causes historically in this population. You can see that over time that there's been a reduction in the number of people starting dialysis, but actually in the African American population, this has again started to increase. You'll also note that there's a higher proportion of people of Hispanic and Native American heritage that are also receiving dialysis. These are data recently that have been reported from the Ghanaian registry, and just I wanted to demonstrate here that the age of onset of people with end-stage kidney disease is much younger than in the UK and also in other high-income settings. This is in part because people are only allowed to start dialysis or provided dialysis care if they are young. But again, I think it demonstrates the proportion and the burden of disease in young people in African settings. So what is causing this high burden of disease in these individuals? It's taken a long time to unpick this, and unfortunately, this has only really been discovered over the last 2 decades. There was an association found on chromosome 22 over 2 decades ago, but unfortunately, due to the GWAS, that a different gene was targeted and as allegedly causal or associated, which was disproven. So then further work identified the APOL1 gene in African Americans that was demonstrated to have a very high association with FSGS, which is a particular type of kidney disease called focal segmental glomerulosclerosis, and also in people who'd historically been thought to have kidney failure due to hypertension. So this was a landmark finding which has led to huge amounts of change in this space. So APOL1 is a lipoprotein that's associated with lipid metabolism, but it's also an important part of innate immunity. It is synthesized in various different organs, including the kidney, and circulating APOL1 levels is actually related to liver synthesis. But we do know that APOL1 itself is not essential for survival. There are various populations that have not got an APOL1 gene at all, and they're therefore not synthesizing protein, and it's not to their disadvantage. But we think that one of the reasons why these variants that are associated with kidney disease, the G1 and G2 alleles, we think that why they're exclusively present in people of African ancestry is that they historically have been protective. They are prevalent in areas where there's high burden of sleeping sickness, a particular trypanosomiasis parasite that causes sleeping sickness. And the theory is that people who have got none of these risk alleles are affected, infected, and killed by trypanosomiasis. But if individuals have got one risk allele, then they have an advantage. So in the same way as sickle cell disease is protective against malaria, it appears that a single risk allele protects against trypanosomiasis, whereas if you have two risk alleles, you are at very much higher risk of developing APOL1 kidney disease. Now, sadly, the slave trade has contributed to the spread of these APOL1 high-risk alleles. So predominantly found originally in West Africa, potentially those who didn't have it in East Africa were destroyed eradicated, I should say, with historically over centuries and centuries ago due to trypanosomiasis. But those with these high-risk alleles survived, predominantly in West Africa, as I said, but these risk alleles have been carried with these populations to the United States, and increasingly we're recognizing that they're found in Central America and South America as well. There are several studies that have described the global distribution. I always find it very amusing to see that somebody's looked in Scotland, in the north of the UK, for this population when there aren't very many people of African ancestry there at all. But you can see, particularly relevant to kind of the Central Americas and South America populations, that there seems to be a reasonable prevalence that has been described. Sadly, there isn't a huge amount of population data in these cohorts, but we're finding increasingly that this is relevant probably to Afro-Brazilian cohorts. Also, Afro-Colombian cohorts have been described. Those with CKD have got high proportions of people with these high-risk genotypes. And interestingly, in my other research world, that this has been associated with preeclampsia, which hasn't been found anywhere else in the world. Again, Panama, there seems to be an association, and different Latin American countries, Salvador, Brazil, Belize, and Colombia, again, seem to be some association, but there's very, very limited data, and we need to look further to see what people, how people are affected by this condition. I was interested when I was reading more about Latin America that there is a high proportion of people that are requiring dialysis, and I do wonder how the APOL1 gene is contributing to this burden. So these are the historic studies which led to these landmark findings. You can see in a cohort of African Americans with primary FSGS that there was more rapid deterioration to end-stage disease in those with two APOL1 variants, the red line, compared to 0 or 1 APOL variant, the blue line. And similarly, in the hypertension study in African Americans, again, rate of deterioration was much more rapid in those with the high-risk genotypes. Interestingly, we historically thought that people who had reached end stage and had APOL1 mediated kidney disease after kidney transplant, they were not at risk, and their donor potentially was at greater risk. And this has led to changes in recommendations and guidelines to advise anyone of African ancestry who's considering donating a kidney should have their APOL1 status tested. This is because in a moderately sized cohort study, that individuals who had donated of African ancestry were found to be more likely to progress to end-stage kidney disease or have a more rapid decline in kidney function. So at the moment, certainly in the UK and in different European settings, that if you are APOL1 high-risk status and you're less than 60, it's not advised to go ahead with donation because of the increased risk to the individual. However, we've also found that potentially the kidney recipient, if they have got high-risk status, may have reduced graft survival. We thought that the graft, if it was not affected by the APOL1 genes, that it would be fine, but it appears that potentially there are other activities happening within the immune system that may be affecting kidney kidney transplant survival. So unusually, these two genes, these two high-risk variants within the APOL1 gene have been recognized to actually have a gain of function status, which is quite unusual, I understand. I'm not a geneticist, but is unusual for an autosomal recessive condition. Current thinking about how these genes gain activity is that something happens within the promoter region to switch the gene on, and this then encodes a protein which is toxic to trypanosomes and other invading parasites. It creates a poor protein which mediates an ion flux across the cell membrane, and this is beneficial to protect against parasites, but it is active, and these risk variants are present in humans in their kidney cells, that this can cause damage. But it seems to be the locally active protein that affects and causes harm, whereas circulating protein levels don't seem to be related to disease. We're now having increasing understanding about where these poor proteins seem to affect, and not only do they affect the cell membrane, but also the intracellular organelle membranes, disrupting ribosomal activities, mitochondrial activities, and leading to this harm. One thing that we do know is that interferon seems to be a key mediator of the gene switching on, and the promoter region has binding sequences for interferon responsive transcription factors. These are animal models that demonstrate that the APOL1 synthesis is upregulated with increasing interferon gamma exposure. And this also fits with the clinical picture of APOL1 disease. We are increasingly recognizing that interferon-mediated states are associated with APOL1 related to kidney disease. So those include viral triggers, so HIV, COVID seemed to be a really big trigger. And I still remember the days when we had a really high burden of acute kidney injury in the UK, and the high majority of people that were affected were African ancestry. And now we're seeing, when we're biopsying these people, that there's a pattern of disease that appears to be switched on by COVID. And these people are APOL1 high risk, have APOL1 high risk genotypes. Also, other diseases including systemic lupus erythematosus, and those having actually receiving interferon treatment seem to be affected. That said, we still don't really understand what switches the gene on in the majority of people. These modifying factors that actually activate, we just don't understand. And the majority of people who have the high-risk genotypes don't actually progress to developing chronic kidney disease. So there seems to be several different cells now that are involved, including the immune system, that appears to act differently in those with high-risk genotypes. We're also learning that there's a whole spectrum of APOL1 kidney disease. We originally thought that it was just this classic hypertensive nephropathy, but we're now seeing that APOL1 disease appears to accelerate different pre-existing kidney conditions. It doesn't appear to be associated with diabetic kidney disease onset, but those who have got diabetic kidney disease and APOL1 high-risk genotypes appear to have accelerated pathology. The same for lupus disease, the same for membranous nephropathy. All these other conditions seem to be also superimposed and affected. And these conditions can affect people at different times in the life course. We're also now increasingly learning that sepsis, as I said earlier, but different types of sepsis, bacterial infection as well as viral infection, appears to be able to switch the gene on. Just diverting slightly from the main path for 1 second, because I'm very concerned about the proportion of people from African ancestry who have this APOL1 gene that have been included in different trials. There are new therapies that are available to increase erythropoietin synthesis, called HIF stabilizers, that have been and now have gone to market for treatment of renal anemia, so erythropoietin deficient anemia. And one thing that has been recently highlighted is the fact that these HIF stablers actually switch on APOL1 gene activity. And we would have known about this had people of African ancestry, Black ethnicities, been recruited to the original trials. But it's only now that we're seeing that potentially there's a potential side effect in this setting. So again, a plea to those of you that are active in clinical trials that this is really important so that we know that everybody with different genetic status have had the opportunity to test these new medications. So as I said earlier, we really don't quite understand how some people develop kidney disease, yet others don't. And it's estimated for those who have got the two high-risk genotypes, only 15% end-stage kidney disease. One of the challenges in terms of understanding this pathology is because APOL1 is only present in very highly evolved primates. So it's not present in rodents, and so those types of animal models are difficult to develop, and that the genetically modified animals don't have the surrounding additional genes to create really genuine haplotype African ancestry specific models. So we're really a little bit stuck. We've now developed some cell lines in the UK, which I think are unique at the moment in terms of utilising the haplotype from people of African ancestry, which is very exciting. This again, sorry to kind of digress back again, but this is another cohort suggesting that APOL1 is really important in all the different forms of kidney disease, including another glomerular nephropathy called membranous nephropathy. With increasing awareness now, though, also understanding what the differences are between the different genotypes. Unfortunately, there's a typo on this slide, but the G1, G2 below the high risk statement here, as I can show on my with my pointer, should be a G1 here. But we're learning that people who've got the G1, G1 combination of risk alleles appear to have more severe disease. They're more likely to get kidney failure. The kidney failure is likely to be at earlier ages, and that their rate of kidney decline is faster. Whereas the G2 seems to be a milder variant. And increasingly we're recognising that the G2 is more common in the Caribbean and African Americans, whereas the G1 appears to be more common in West Africa. But also there are differences in terms of how the gene appears to be affecting people with kidney disease. And more recently, a sub-Saharan cohort has been recruited in South Africa and in Nigeria and Ghana. And interestingly, there wasn't such a strong association with kidney disease and advanced CKD with these high-risk alleles, but they were more strongly associated with albuminuria, so early stages of kidney disease. Now, it's difficult to really unpack this because it may be that these populations don't manage to survive and be sustained with renal replacement therapies. So that might be a major confounder. But there may be differences in terms of as I said, the gene activation with different triggers in these places, or different protective factors that may be at play. The other learning from this study was that actually it also appears to be an additive effect with those individuals who've only got one risk allele rather than just the two risk alleles. Now learning that probably this is an important kind of dose effect. So if you've got one risk allele, it doesn't mean that you're completely okay, but the two risk alleles certainly is a worse phenotype. This is a cohort that we've studied in the UK. This was a cohort with HIV nephropathy, and 49% of those with kidney failure had the two high-risk genotypes. And again, nearly 50% of those with FSGS also had these high-risk genotypes. So it's definitely present. We've undertaken a large cohort study, which is ongoing, developing a whole biobank of patients who've got with and without kidney disease and with and without APOL1, various different platforms and samples that have been collected. We now have nearly over 500 patients in this cohort, but I think really mindful that this is a challenging cohort to recruit because there's a lot of mistrust in patients who have had historic malpractice in clinical trials, and people are very anxious about contributing. 89% of this cohort are in the most poor indices of multiple deprivation, so the most poor people in our local community affected by kidney disease and that are being recruited. In our cohort in the UK, a lot of these people, because of migration patterns, are from Ghana, Nigeria, Sierra Leone, and the Caribbean. But again, the people that we're finding with kidney disease due to APOL1 are those with hypertension and this FSGS. We have also demonstrated that these high-risk alleles are a big problem in the UK, and also that the proportion of people affected with kidney disease with the two high-risk alleles is probably higher than even in America. So I think that we're learning that there are different patterns of disease in different countries, which is why I think it's really important for every country to understand their prevalence within their different cultural groups. This again is showing that we've got more G1 than G2 in our populations, and I think that seems to be a bit more of a kind of common theme across the One thing that I think is very interesting about this cohort as well is that a high proportion of these people who have not historically had any cause of their kidney disease being identified, a lot of them had APOL1 disease. So I think this is a really kind of new territory. Those people that are presenting with kidney failure potentially have this condition that hasn't been caught early and potentially treated. And we've also found that people have got are younger with the high-risk genotypes. We also have found that people who've got high-risk genotypes don't necessarily have a lot of protein in their urine, and this is a frustration that I'm constantly kind of aware of, because a lot of the new therapies are targeting reducing protein in the urine as a treatment and a demonstration of treatment success for APOL1 kidney disease. And I think, unfortunately, that unless we start to address this group of people with low urinary albumin-creatinine ratios, we're going to miss a large burden of disease. So, but excitingly, there are now several therapies that are being developed to address APOL1 kidney disease. One of the key challenges is finding people before they've got advanced disease. But this is a new treatment, inaxaplin, which is a protein that it basically binds to the abnormal APOL1 protein and stabilizes the podocyte and prevents further damage. So this has been demonstrated to be beneficial in animal models, switching off the influx of ions, and also reducing proteinuria in animal models. And then a phase 2 trial, a very small, unblinded, short 12-week trial with inaxaplin was conducted, which demonstrated a 47% reduction in the urinary protein creatinine ratio. So now this inaxaplin has been scaled up into large phase 2, phase 3 study, and the recruitment is still underway across the America, the UK, and there are sites in Brazil that are open, and I believe other sites that are being explored in Latin America as well as Africa. There's another therapy that's also starting to get out of the starting blocks, which has been developed by AstraZeneca. This is an antisense RNA which encodes, which binds to the encoded mRNA for APOL1 and prevents it being converted into an active protein. And finally, there's other evidence that perhaps other factors are at play, and this is a demonstration of difference in outcomes for a plant-based diet that was introduced in African Americans, and actually those who had high-risk alleles were most likely to benefit from the from a southern diet, so improved diet pattern. So there may be different therapies that can contribute to protecting against APOL1 kidney disease. And this is particularly relevant because a lot of the patient populations that we work with have anxieties about taking therapies, particularly those that haven't been tried in their communities, but also very keen to trial holistic therapies and alternative therapies in conjunction. We've been setting up a national registry of this condition in the UK and now have 900 patients that have been recruited, and we're going to start testing them formally for APOL1 disease. We're also trying to engage our local communities to test for kidney disease early, so doing albumin-creatinine ratios tested in the community, and also testing family members of people who've got end-stage kidney disease, so that we can explore whether or not they've got kidney disease, and then move on to seeing whether or not they've got APOL1 kidney disease, with a view to being able to start these novel therapies sooner. However, a lot of people are concerned about finding conditions that potentially might not in the future, and particularly genetic testing is fraught with different ethical issues. This was a Delphi consensus that was conducted in the US, which basically defined some anxieties, but overall there was a push for increasing awareness and education around APOL1 disease, but also for people to have the opportunity to be genotyped, particularly those with kidney disease, but potentially those without kidney disease in the future, to be able to target those that were at risk over future years and decades. I'm an advocate for testing for APOL1 disease, and certainly since I've been introducing it in our clinical practice, thanks to the development of the SynLab APOL1 genetic test, that I think it's been very helpful in terms of being able to help us risk stratify who we should keep within our specialist services and who we can discharge back to primary care. But also, I think there is an opportunity to remove the blame associated with the development of kidney disease. People, sadly, in our healthcare system, have been labelled of not being looking after their blood pressure or their health, and therefore it's their own fault that they've developed this end-stage kidney disease. But how can that be true when somebody's in their 30s and haven't had a lifetime of hypertension to mismanage? It's often a relief to some people when they find out that this is a genetic condition. And we routinely now check, as I said earlier, our black kidney donors to ensure that they're not at high risk. There's also been a study in the US that has actually tested APOL1 status for people with hypertension, and they found that people who were found, even without kidney disease, to know their APOL1 status, that they were more likely to comply with their medication advice and also lifestyle changes, and they had lower blood pressure. So there may be benefit in empowering people to know their status and be proactive in their healthcare. But understandably, there are a lot of concerns, and there's concern about misuse of this information, loss of confidentiality, and also discrimination by insurers. And at the moment, there's, because of this fear and this mistrust, quite rightly in different healthcare settings, and that we're not advocating that routine testing should be available to everybody. There's also a challenge, and particularly in Central America and South America, about unpicking who is at risk, because there are lots of admixtures of genetic descent, and ultimately there may be genetic profiling that allows people to determine how likely they are to have an APOL1 risk allele because of the admixture of different ancestries over centuries. And one day, maybe all of us will know this profile for ourselves. The KDIGO, which is our international body which makes recommendations about clinical practice, these are the guidelines that were recommended for APOL1 testing. So making sure that everybody has informed consent, that people are counselled, that only people who have got access to care should be tested, and that only those with diagnosed kidney disease or with very suspected high prevalence of having APOL1 or kidney donor should be tested, and only those that were really, really anxious about wanting to desperately know their status, but otherwise it shouldn't be routinely offered to everybody. So, as I said earlier, I'm really delighted that we've had this opportunity, supported by SynLab, to develop our own test in the UK, and this is now widely available to people in the UK that we're trying to support uptake. One of the unique parts of this test is that we've also got an additional genetic variant that we're testing for, this P264K variant, which has been found to actually have an additional protective factor in those that have got high-risk G2 alleles. So those people who've got high-risk alleles and this N264K actually behave as those that are low risk. So it's very useful to, particularly in the setting without disease, to be able to interpret these findings according to this additional mutation. It is very rare, and we're only finding it in 2 to 3% of the population, but this is a new variant that is also going to be translated potentially into clinical practice because it's being used as a new therapeutic agent that, again, is under development at the moment. We have developed a lot of materials to educate and communicate about the results. Again, I don't think they're perfect, and I think there's more to be done. And I would be very keen to talk to anyone who's got more expertise in terms of communicating genetic testing. It's a lot harder than I originally thought. But I really, once again, like to thank SynLab for helping me develop this test. It really opened a huge opportunity to understand this high burden condition in our African communities who are disproportionately affected by kidney disease. I think it really is responsible for a high proportion of the excess incidence of chronic kidney disease and kidney failure in our Black communities. It's a very powerful and common genetic risk factor, but we still don't understand how, why, and when it is switched on by these different triggers. Unusually, it has this gain of toxic function which damages cells rather than coding for something that is no longer available. But it does mean that there is opportunities to risk stratify, to highlight those at greatest risk, and to be able to target those for new treatments that are beyond just the traditional therapies for blood pressure and kidney disease. And again, I think it's just to remind us all that whilst in a privileged setting in a high-income country, we can do this testing, but the majority of the disease is actually likely to be in West Africa, in the Caribbean, and in Central and South America, where there is less access to these therapies, to kidney replacement therapy. Therefore, targeted identification of kidney disease is really important. Thank you very much to all the team that work with me on this, and again to SynLab, and thank you for listening.